Your motorcycle has been seized and will be auctioned this Friday. I stared at the text in disbelief, the mug slipping from my hand and shattering on the kitchen floor. They stole my Harley. In that one crushing moment, the world around me seemed to freeze. My phone buzzed repeatedly with frantic notifications, and I could barely process the shock. My prized Harley, my pride, my passion, the symbol of countless rides and freedom on the open road, had been taken without my permission. And as if that wasn't enough, someone had the audacity to sell it. My blood boiled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Who would dare commit such an outrageous act? Little did they know, I wasn't just any biker. I was the CEO of Harley-Davidson, and I was about to turn this injustice into the most epic comeback in motorcycle history. Harley-Davidson isn't just a brand. It's a legacy of rebellion, freedom, and the raw power of the open road. I grew up riding through endless highways, feeling the wind whip past me as I chased sunsets and adventures. My Harley was more than a machine. It was a testament to my spirit and a key part of my identity. Now, as the CEO of the very company that built that legacy, I was expected to lead with both passion and business acumen. Yet nothing in my board meetings or executive retreats could have prepared me for the day I learned that the same organization responsible for upholding our brand's reputation had been violated in the most personal way imaginable. I reside on a sprawling property on the outskirts of a bustling suburban enclave. A place where the highways meet the horizon and the rumble of engines is a familiar soundtrack. The neighborhood, known as Ironwood Estates, is a well-manicured community with strict rules enforced by an overzealous homeowners association, HOA. Their mission: to keep everything pristine and uniform, even if it means clashing with the freewheeling spirit of true motorcyclists like myself. At the helm of the HOA's tyranny was Karen Matthews, dubbed HOA Karen by residents for her relentless, nitpicky enforcement of rules. Dressed in power suits and armed with an ever-present clipboard, Karen prided herself on being the guardian of neighborhood order. To her, every deviation from the meticulously maintained standards was a personal affront that had to be eradicated at all costs. Her eyes were set on ensuring that everything under her watch, lawns, driveways, even the sound of a roaring engine, aligned with her idea of perfection. Ironwood Estates was a strange mix. On one side, proud motorcyclists and free spirits who valued freedom, adventure, and individuality. On the other, a regimented community obsessed with conformity. I had always straddled that line, cherishing the open road while also running a successful business built on the very ethos of that freedom. My Harley was the symbol of my passion, the embodiment of the legacy of rebellion that Harley-Davidson represented. And now, to see it seized by an HOA with no regard for personal property, or worse, sold to some faceless bidder, was a betrayal that cut deep. As I surveyed my property that fateful morning, I couldn't help but think about all the hours I'd spent perfecting every detail of my life as a biker, as a business leader. The thought that someone could overstep their bounds and disrupt my life in such a blatant way was not just infuriating. It was unacceptable, and I vowed then that I would not stand for it. It began with an innocuous visit to my office. I had just settled into a board meeting when my phone exploded with notifications. My heart sank as I read the message. My Harley had been seized, and now it was scheduled to be auctioned off that very Friday. My mind raced through a whirlwind of disbelief and fury. I knew my Harley had immense sentimental and financial value. It was a one-of-a-kind piece of American ingenuity and a symbol of the freedom I had spent my life defending. I immediately pulled up the security footage from the parking lot outside my property. The images were shocking. Under the cover of early morning darkness, a group of individuals, their faces obscured by masks, had broken into the premises, located my prized Harley, and, with surprising precision, disconnected it from its mounting. The scene was almost cinematic. The thieves moved like shadows, their actions swift and deliberate, as if they'd planned this heist for weeks. And then came the worst part. The digital records showed that the stolen bike had been promptly listed for auction under the HOA's authority. It was as if the very institution that was supposed to protect our community had turned against me. I couldn't fathom how this could happen. I had always assumed that the HOA was a necessary evil, an organization that kept our community orderly, even if their methods were a bit overzealous. But this was personal. Not only had they overstepped their bounds by seizing my property, they had also sold it without any consent. The betrayal stung more sharply than I could have imagined. Fueled by rage and determination, I set out to gather every shred of evidence. I secured additional camera footage from nearby businesses, compiled detailed logs from our security system, and even interviewed neighbors who reported seeing suspicious activity near the property. Every piece of evidence pointed to a systematic, almost industrial operation, one that seemed to have been orchestrated from within the HOA itself. In parallel, I reached out to my legal team. We pored over the fine print of our community regulations and discovered glaring inconsistencies. There was no legal basis for the HOA to seize or sell personal property without explicit consent from the owner. This discovery was both a vindication and a rallying point. I realized that if I could expose these illegal practices, I would not only recover my Harley, but also send a resounding message to the entire community and beyond. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that this was no isolated incident. Rumors began circulating among other residents about similar overreaches by the HOA, stories of fines and seizures that were never properly justified. It was as if a hidden network within the HOA had been using its power to bully and extort homeowners for their own gain. I decided then that I wouldn't just fight to get my Harley back. I would dismantle the very system that allowed such abuse of power. I scheduled a press conference, assembled my digital dossier, and prepared to confront the HOA board head-on. I intended to reveal everything: the unauthorized seizure, the fraudulent auction listing, and the evidence of internal corruption within the HOA. My goal was not only to recover my stolen property, but to ignite a reform movement that would protect the rights of every homeowner in our community. As the auction date approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. My phone was inundated with messages of support from fellow motorcyclists, neighbors, and even some disillusioned HOA members. The digital campaign under hashtags like #HarleyJustice and #StopItTheBullying gained momentum, and the story quickly spread beyond our local community to regional news outlets. In a dramatic turn of events, I received confirmation from the auction house that the sale was imminent, a final, desperate attempt by those in power to legitimize their actions. The stakes were higher than ever. Not only was my Harley at risk of disappearing forever, but the entire narrative of homeowner rights in our community was on the line. Every moment, every piece of evidence, and every supportive comment from the digital community bolstered my resolve. I was prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim my property and expose the rampant abuse of power within the HOA. The battle had become personal, a fight for justice that went far beyond a single stolen motorcycle. It was a battle for the very soul of our community, and I knew that I had to emerge victorious. In the days following the revelation of my stolen Harley and its impending auction, the digital backlash was immense. Social media platforms exploded with posts, memes, and videos condemning the HOA's actions. Hashtags like #HarleyJustice, #StopHOA and #ReturnMyHarley trended not just locally, but across regional networks, drawing attention from motorcycle clubs, legal advocates, and even national news outlets. Every shared post, every retweeted video, and every comment from outraged residents fueled a movement that was growing exponentially. Local news reporters were soon on the scene, capturing footage of my property, the now empty parking lot where my Harley had once proudly stood, and interviews with neighbors who voiced their shock and support. "It's unbelievable," one reporter said on air, "that a community organization could stoop so low as to seize and sell a resident's property without any legal authority." The coverage painted a picture of an overreaching HOA, one that had lost touch with the principles of fairness and individual rights. Within the HOA board itself, the internal atmosphere grew increasingly volatile. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and leaked minutes revealed deep divisions among the board members. Some staunchly defended the actions taken as necessary for maintaining community order, while others expressed growing concern over the blatant misuse of power. We must review our policies and hold those responsible accountable. One board member was quoted saying, his voice trembling with the weight of responsibility. The discord within the board only intensified the public's outcry. I continued to update my digital dossier, posting new video clips, screenshots, and detailed explanations of every illegal action taken by the HOA. My online community rallied, with residents sharing similar stories of arbitrary fines and unauthorized seizures. Digital petitions demanding that the HOA board reverse its actions and implement stricter oversight quickly garnered thousands of signatures. Every post, every hashtag, and every supportive comment was a resounding declaration that property rights were not to be trifled with. Amid this growing movement, I organized a press conference. In front of a sea of reporters and cameras, I laid out the entire saga. The security footage showing the masked thieves, the fraudulent auction listing, and the legal inconsistencies in the HOA's actions. I explained that not only had they stolen my Harley, but they had also attempted to legitimize the theft by selling it off as if it were community property. I vowed to take the matter to the highest legal authority if necessary, and I called on every resident who had ever been victimized by arbitrary enforcement to stand up for their rights. The local police department and legal authorities eventually confirmed that the seizure and sale were indeed without proper authorization. Their statements lent official credence to my claims, further isolating the HOA and intensifying the pressure on the board. The situation had escalated beyond a personal vendetta. It was now a battle for justice, fairness, and the protection of individual property rights. As auction day drew near, the tension in our community was palpable. I received constant updates from my legal team, who were working around the clock to halt the auction. Every time my phone buzzed with news, I braced myself for the next twist in this unfolding drama. The digital campaign continued to gain traction, and influential figures from the motorcycle community began to voice their support, sending messages that reinforced the idea that the spirit of Harley-Davidson, freedom, rebellion, and uncompromising authenticity could not be suppressed. One particularly electrifying evening, as I sat down to review the final details of our legal case, I received an alert that sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The auction house had posted the final bidding schedule online. My heart pounded as I realized that, unless I acted swiftly, my Harley could be gone forever. I mobilized every resource at my disposal: legal briefs, public statements, and even coordinated a social media blitz to ensure that the auction would be halted and that the truth of the HOA's misconduct would be exposed to the fullest extent. The collective voice of our community, the digital evidence, and the official statement from law enforcement combined to form an unstoppable force. The movement was no longer confined to Cedar Ridge. It had become a regional outcry for justice. Every new post, every shared video, every hashtag was a declaration that property rights were inviolable and that no one, especially not an overreaching HOA, could steal our freedom. The stage was set for the final showdown. The HOA board announced a last-minute public hearing to address the auction and to decide on disciplinary action against those involved. The news sent shockwaves through our community, and as the day of the hearing approached, the energy was electric. Neighbors organized rallies, petition drives, and public meetings to demand accountability. The digital dossier I had painstakingly compiled was now the cornerstone of a movement that promised to change the landscape of community governance forever. Every moment was charged with anticipation. The community's outcry had reached a crescendo, and it was clear that the final public hearing would be the turning point, a moment when the forces of justice would finally triumph over bureaucratic tyranny. And as auction day loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon, I knew that we were on the brink of reclaiming not just my Harley, but the very principles of fairness and freedom that define our community. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse array of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of resolute residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would determine the fate of our community's enforcement policies and, ultimately, my stolen Harley. With an air of unwavering determination, Councilwoman Rebecca Thompson stepped up to the podium, her eyes burning with the collective resolve of those gathered. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs of the unauthorized auction, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an undeniable conclusion. Councilwoman Thompson began, her voice steady and commanding. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, namely the illegal seizure and subsequent sale of private property, were not driven by any legitimate concern for community welfare, but were instead the result of personal bias and a gross abuse of power. Our community's rights as individual homeowners must be upheld, and we cannot allow such blatant violations to go unchallenged. A heavy silence fell over the room as Thompson continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies that enabled such overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines to protect the property rights of every resident in Cedar Ridge. Today's decision is not just about reclaiming a stolen motorcycle. It is a resounding declaration that our community will stand for fairness, accountability, and the inalienable right to own and protect our property. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, a stalwart defender of property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. "No one in our community should ever have to endure the tyranny of arbitrary rule enforcement. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that Cedar Ridge values truth, freedom, and innovation above all. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local business oversight office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official documents that confirmed the illegality of the seizure and sale of my Harley. The evidence was irrefutable. Not only was my motorcycle seized without legal authority, but every attempt to justify the action was exposed as a sham. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release to ensure transparency. Councilwoman Thompson concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where every resident's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with integrity and fairness." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live, work, and ride free. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and personal freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The days of arbitrary fines and abuse of power were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Ridge underwent a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread like wildfire throughout local media and social networks, sparking impassioned debates about property rights, creative freedom, and the role of community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive action taken to safeguard every resident's right to own and protect their property. Hashtags like hashtag property rights, hashtag no more HOA bullying, and hashtag Harley Justice trended widely, reinforcing the community's collective determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where individual freedom was honored. Neighbors who had long endured the oppressive grip of the HOA's stringent rules now spoke proudly about their right to live and work on their own terms, unshackled by the whims of an overzealous enforcer. Our property is our legacy, and we must protect it at all costs, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his words resonating throughout the room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Ridge would always champion the rights and creativity of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, introduced comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint would be rigorously scrutinized and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or unwarranted seizures. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further by organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns designed to empower residents and to underscore the importance of property rights and creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices become a force for change, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite and demand a more equitable governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to fight back when the HOA stole and sold my Harley, when they dared to overstep their bounds, ignited a movement that resonated far beyond my personal loss. Neighbors who had long suffered under arbitrary enforcement found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance, uniting under the common banner of property rights and personal freedom. The digital evidence that exposed the injustice became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that no one was above the law. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no individual, regardless of their self-appointed authority, can trample on others' rights without facing accountability. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for comprehensive reform and the perils of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered beneath the golden glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Harley Justice" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not just the recovery of stolen Harley, but the triumph of our collective rights over arbitrary tyranny, Councilwoman Thompson proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our community's commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Ridge, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen's audacious theft and subsequent sale of my Harley was exposed, and how I, as CEO of Harley-Davidson, fought back with unwavering resolve, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live free. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, What began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Ridge would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.